Okay, let me continue the additional clips. The next part will have a lot to do with my graduate school and military service, and the earlier part of my life. So I go to the same MP4 file that I made, and we go to the 12 minutes and 20 seconds. I gotta memorize the times.
Question I have for you, I want to talk a little bit about your personal story in more detail. So, give me a picture of your time in university, what you were studying. Tell me about having the principal and a little more into your
Okay. I was, first of all, I became a good student in high school, probably around 5th or 6th grade. I realized I could be a good student. I was a good student in high school, but I was poor at PT, so it didn't matter what your PT grade was, but I sort of got a pass on that, which is not really that common to be the case, but it was with me. I won a chemistry scholarship by going to Williamsburg and passing a test, or taking a test in April of '61. So when I went down to Williamsburg, I had a chemistry scholarship, and I actually got straight A's at midterm. When I was thrown out, my roommate was suspicious of me because of not being interested in women and clothes, and some conversations that we had over an English theme assignment. It's something that built up. It's a little hard to explain. And then he had witnessed an assault himself earlier in his own life, which might have contributed to his attitude. That sort of built up the attitude. But anyway, when that was over, I came back. I went to George Washington University starting in February of 1962. My parents were still, they agreed to support me, but I think that was an issue for a while with them, with the shock of the way this happened. My father had a mild heart attack in March of 1962. I started getting back to composing music again while I was home and started playing the piano. That's another thing. I took piano since 3rd grade. Was actually reasonably good at it by the time I was a senior in high school. Took up some of the other problems. I started playing tournament chess in 1964. At GW, and that actually was pretty good for my mental health, I think, to become fairly proficient at chess. And no, I don't cheat. That's chess with smart or whatever it is. I graduated at the start of 1966 and went to graduate school at the University of Kansas. Graduate school was tough at the first semester, then it got easier. It's always hard at the beginning. But I was an assistant instructor, and there were complaints about the way I graded, and they were remedial students. So I was removed as an assistant instructor during the first term of it, so I became a programmer for a while. But then I got the assistantship back in the last semester. So I actually taught a normal semester of remedial algebra, and probably a third of the students fail, which is what normally going to happen with a class like that. But again, as I said, those are people that will, if they're boys, if they're men, they might be more vulnerable to the draft. We had student deferments then. And then I went right into the Army. I took the draft physical 3 times because I didn't want the stigma, the psychiatric treatment. Took the draft physical 3 times and went from 4F to 1Y to 1A. And I went into the Army in February of 1968, which was I was literally in special training company when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And we were supposedly on red alert to go into downtown Columbia and control the streets. Now, that never happened. I was in the grease pit on KP the night that LBJ announced he wasn't going to run again. And I was, to backtrack a little bit, in 1963, of course, is when in 1963 to 1964, I also had my first job at the University of Kansas, at National Bureau of Standards, in Washington on Van Ness Street. And I had to have a medical to get that job, so I had to admit to the doctor that I had said that I was a latent homosexual. And my parents had said I must never mention that again. That's the way things were then. So I called my father and asked him if it was all right to tell him. Now I still got the job, but even then things were starting to improve. They were starting to realize there was something wrong with the way they were thinking about this. They were starting to realize that. And I had that job and went to school at night for a year. In a couple of other things come to mind. In the weekend that Kennedy was assassinated, I remember I went to First Baptist Church, downtown Washington, D.C., which is where presidents went. When Jack Ruby shot Kennedy, I was literally in the car riding with my parents down 17th Street and heard the shots live on the radio with my parents in the car. Still remember that. In 1962, when I was still a patient at NIH, I was the only patient that was regularly going into town to go to class at night. So I was the only person who knew about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And came back and I would tell them what was going on, and even some of the staff didn't know. And they were horrified at what I was telling them, but it was true. And I was the only person. That's how things were. And going forward, well, those are the main things, main shockers that come to mind. I would always seem to be in the right place when something sensational happens, almost like Forrest Gump or something,
So Christian, I realize I'm not about to count race.
Okay. I would just mention something else. When I took the draft physical the first time in 1964 in Virginia, they did ask about homosexual tendencies on the form. When I took it the second time in 1966, taking a train to Kansas City from KU and spending the night in a barracks and taking it the next morning, they had stopped asking the question. And they didn't ask in 1967 in the fall of 1967, when I finally tested 1A. They had stopped asking. So in a sense, we had don't ask, don't tell then. And then when the draft was eliminated in 1973, they started asking again sometime thereafter, which continued until 1990, till the don't ask, don't tell policy in 1993. That's just another aside. And thank you for listening to this segment.